who's come today. I'm Zach. I'm team captain for CrossFire. I just want to say thank you on behalf of CrossFire and Valley Lutheran School for being here to listen to this event today. I'll hand it off to Drew, who coordinated most of our stuff for today.
Hello everyone, as Zach said previously, my name is Drew. I'm a bit of a newbie on the team as I just joined around the end of last year for Into the Deep. But anyways, that's not really important right now. You guys want to know about the archaeology stuff. So I'm here with Sherry Maury-Arts, and she's here to talk about what archaeology is, and honestly, she's pretty cool. She is a fauna analyst. Sorry, my bad. She graduated at the University of Kansas. I'm sorry, I'm getting my information wrong. And that's pretty much all I got. So I'm going to hand it over to Sherry right now, and she's going to give you some pretty cool archaeology stuff.
Yep, I got this. Oh. We have dueling microphones. So I'm going to start out by trying to figure out where you all are knowledge-wise. What is archaeology? Speak up, let me know. More than digging in the dirt. Why are we digging in the dirt? What about the artifacts? I'm sorry, say it again. Okay, whose history? You're right, you're absolutely right. People. So a lot of people, I've discovered, think about archaeology as far as it's finding a cool artifact, a mummy, or an arrowhead, or something, and taking it home and putting it in a museum or something like that. But it's not about the objects. Archaeology is about studying human cultures. So we are a branch of anthropology. The field of anthropology is the study of human cultures. Archaeology, then, is the branch that goes back in time. So those artifacts now are the clues that tell us, so it's like a puzzle. We pick up the puzzle piece and we try and figure out how that fits into the story of human existence. Modern anthropologists, ethnographers, people who are working now in the 21st century, they can interview their subjects. They can say, tell me about how your school is organized. How does your government work? And people, you can ask them and learn about it. In archaeology, our folks are gone. We can't interview them. So all we have is the clues that they left behind. So those items are clues, so we're detectives. We're picking up the clues, and some of them are cool. Yeah, sure. Egyptian mummies, that's pretty swift. In Iowa, everybody's excited to find arrowheads and spear points and things like that. But the question is, what does it tell us about the people? So, not about the artifacts, but about the people. We want to know things like, how did people interact with their environment? How did they organize their lives? How do cultures change through time? Those are the big questions that we're shooting for to find out. So, because I work at the Iowa State Archaeologist's office, we're going to be sort of Iowa focused. My research interest is pre-contact times throughout the Great Plains. So everything from Alberta and Saskatchewan all the way down through Texas. I've spent a lot of time working in places like Kansas and Oklahoma, and North Dakota, South Dakota, and now Iowa. So we divide the chronological record into pre-contact and post-contact times in North America. Pre-contact is before the arrival of the Europeans. So who was here before the Europeans got here? Native Americans. You'd be surprised how many people can't answer that question too. So when we look at pre-contact sites, what we're finding are villages, campsites, burials, stone quarries, overlooks, kill sites. So it can include anything. And so it might be as cool as finding, a place where somebody killed a mastodon and butchered it or something like that. Or it could be a bunch of fire-cracked rock where somebody built a fire and made a hearth. Fire-cracked rock is not the artifact everybody wants to take home and put on the shelf or put up in a museum. It's just rocks that have been heated and cooled and heated and cooled. But they tell us, what does it tell us about people? Say aloud again. They had campfires. They could control fire. What do people do around the fire? Warm up, yeah, heat. What else? Cook. What else? Would you need a fire out there now without any electricity? You need light. What else do people do around the fire while you're sitting around cooking and eating? Talking. Yeah, this is the place where the kids got their education. This is where the parents and the grandparents told stories, teaching kids about their history. You guys are doing anthropology now, all because of fire-cracked rock telling us about that somebody had a fire here. So that's the kind of thought processes we want to go through. Archaeologists also look at post-contact sites. And for those, we still have Native American villages. They're still here, they're still around. But we also add now farm sites, town sites, roadways, schoolhouses, kilns, mills, all kinds of things. Anything that people have done and left evidence of, and we leave lots of evidence, that's archaeology. That's what it's all about. So we're going to step back into the pre-contact times. This is reproduction. This is a living village at the Plymouth, Massachusetts. This is a Wampanoag house. The Wampanoag were the people who greeted the pilgrims when they arrived. So at Plymouth, there is a living village that reenacts what the pilgrims' villages would have been like at that time. And there's also a Wampanoag village where they reenact what their lifestyle was like back at that time. So I like to look at this picture and think about, first of all, it looks really cool. It's a little washed out because our lights are on, but it looks pretty cozy, kind of comfy there. But what would be left after 1,000 years? What do you see? Would the animal skins be there after 1,000 years? No. We would have things like maybe that pot, probably broken, but yeah, clay pottery. Pottery will survive. The fireplace, we'll have ash, we'll have charcoal, we'll have those good old fire-cracked rocks that are around the fireplace. Those will still be there. Oh, there's another pot, and it's sitting on hot rocks. It's not sitting over the fire. They've moved it off of the fire, and those rocks are just keeping whatever is cooking in there warm. Oh, where else is my thing? It's getting hard to see. Oh, he's got an axe in his hand. We won't have the handle of the axe, but the head of the axe, either made out of metal or stone. In this case, it's metal, but in pre-contact time, stone also. That would survive, but the handle wouldn't. Do you have a question? Yes. So this fellow sitting here, he's got beads around his neck. That would survive. These fellows have a pipe. The pipe is made with clay or stone. The bowl is. The reed is a stem. The stem is a reed. How about we do it right? So you won't have that reed, the stem that goes in your mouth, but we would still have the bowl. And there's the jewelry. That would still be there. But all those beautiful woven mats that are hanging on the wall, and the bags, and the animal furs, the people, all that stuff is gone. So we have to go from those paltry little clues that we have to try and reconstruct and reimagine a house like this. So a lot of the questions people ask archaeologists, how do you know where to dig? That's the first question. We do modeling based on previous knowledge. We can use remote sensing technology to identify sites. And we can do careful subsurface testing to study the history of the changing landscapes and drainages. You know that the landscape is always changing. Rivers erode, things flood and get buried under the silt deposited by the flood. So if I want to find something that's 2,000 years old, I need to know where the land surface was 2,000 years ago, and it's not where it is today. So there's a whole research specialty in archaeology called geomorphology, which is studying the land and the changing of the landscape. So they can find out, you know, why look for something if it's eroded away, or find out where it belongs. So our modeling developed on past understanding. We know how people lived. What are people looking for when they decide where to put a site? They made choices. They needed some different resources. So they're going to look for places where there's water. That's pretty much a universal need for people. They want to look for places where the habitat for the animals that they're hunting would be. If you're hunting salmon, you got to be at a place where the salmon are going to be swimming upstream come in the spring. If you're hunting bison, you want to be out in the wide open plains and the grasslands, things like that. They want a warm, dry place to build their houses. You don't want to be in a place where it's going to flood, so you might be up on a little mud a little bit. If they're farmers, they want land for farming. Resources like fire, stone to make tools out of, and other supplies. All of these things people had to keep in their heads. Maybe there's some enemies out there and you need to have some safety from attack. Those are all decisions that people were making on a regular basis about where to put their sites. So they also had to understand their environment, the changes of the seasons. Animals change their behavior with different seasons. Different plants are available at different times of year. If you're going to harvest nuts, it's going to be in the fall. If you're going to pick berries, it's going to be in the summertime. Flooding made some areas uninhabitable in certain times of the year. The floodplain is a really great place to farm, but it's not a really great place to be camped in March. So people made their decisions about maybe we're going to camp up here, we'll come back down after the flood season to plant our gardens. So they could move their house sites to best suit the kind of shelter for severe weather. In the wintertime, do you want to be up on the hilltops where that wind is whipping along, or down in the valley where there's lots of trees for firewood and you're sheltered from the wind? Again, people were making those decisions. We have to understand the decisions they were making when we're looking for sites. We also look for things that people had to consider. How many people can we live in one place? Is this a place for 300 people or a place for 2 little houses with 5 or 6 people? Where are your friends and family living? Where do your enemies live? Do you need to fortify your village? What areas are important to spiritual use? The landscape was also an important location for people for spiritual practices. We can also build modeling on what we already know archaeologically. There are more than 35,000 sites recorded in the state of Iowa. The Office of the State Archaeologist, where I worked, is in charge of keeping these records for all the sites found. We aren't the only archaeologists working in the state. There are lots of archaeologists at different colleges and universities. There are private companies that do archaeology, but they have to report every site that they find to us. So we have a big database. Do you see any patterns? What do you see? Rivers. Lots of rivers. Look at all the concentrations on there. Now the other thing is there's a data associated with every one of those dots in our database. So I can say all the data. It's like, what kind of a site was it? Was it a kill site? Was it a find spot? Was it a village? How old was it? Is it, you know, whatever information we had for dating it. So now I can look at these patterns and I can use the database and I can ask it questions. Where were archaic period sites found most often? Where were kill sites found most often? Where were farm sites found most often? And using our computers and our data, we can rearrange all of that information to make models. If I'm looking for archaic period sites, I want to know that kind of information. Do you see any other weird patterns up here? Do you see those suspicious straight lines? Things like this? Or this? That's telling you about the archaeological culture. Those are the places where we've done a lot of work. It's required by law that if somebody's going to build a highway or a reservoir or a bridge, things like that, they're required by law to have a cultural resources check done first. We don't want to destroy something with a bulldozer that we didn't even know was there. So every time there's a highway, we go out, or some archaeologists go out and do a survey along that way. So if you look down here on Highway 218, the Highway of the Saints, it was like sites all the way down. So you can see, and if you look right up there in the middle, northwest part of the state up here, not very many dots up there. That doesn't mean that people weren't living up there. It just means nobody spent a lot of time looking up there. So you have to take those things into consideration as well. So we can use our computerized mapping systems like GIS that allow us to search for patterns in this database and find out where sites are commonly found. And we can develop models that can predict that. So then we'll go out and we'll look for features on the land, things that will show up. Sometimes the site is right there. We can look for mounds, like rather than pointing. These are burial mounds at Springbrook State Park. We can look for ditches, depressions, raised fields, rock shelters. This is some rock art up here in Alameda County. Structures, foundations. It's hard to see here. Can you pick out that big depression there where the red arrow is pointing to it? That was a house, a big house that was lived by the Mandan in North Dakota. And this was the village where Lewis and Clark spent their first winter. There are lots of these big depressions up there. I'm going to try and blow this one up a little bit, zoom in on this. This is a fortified village. You can see that ditch is the wall, the fortification ditch, and the little depressions in the middle are where houses were inside there. This plowed field, this part of the site has not been plowed. Where somebody plowed it over here, that took off that half of the site. The plowing eliminated. There's still material there buried underground, but you don't see that surface manifestation of the ditches anymore. We can also just find scatters of artifacts on the ground. Again, you've got to be able to recognize them. These over here, that's a core. That's been flaked. Somebody was taking flakes off of that to make stone tools with. And the debris all around here is the flaking debris. They took tools with them, but they left the debris, the garbage left over from making those tools, behind for us to find. This site here, you see the ring? This is one of those things where it's not an exciting thing to find. They're rocks, they're glacial cobbles, but they're arranged in a ring. There's another one right there behind it. These are teepee rings. Listen, we're up in North Dakota now, where people lived in teepees and moved around to hunt bison. When they built their teepees, they grabbed those glacial cobbles, which are everywhere up there because there was lots of glaciers up there, and they weighted down the bottoms of their teepees with them to keep the wind from blowing underneath. When they left, they picked up the teepee and left, but they left the ring there. because you're going to find more glacial cobbles at your next site. And who wants to carry a bunch of big rocks around with them? So if we find those rings, we go, oh, this looks suspiciously round. Rocks don't normally fall that way. We'll go straight to the middle of that and do a test to see if there's a fireplace in the middle. And there usually is. So that's another way to identify sites. So this is just walking around on the ground surface, looking and seeing, and using our past knowledge from where sites have been found and our predictive models. And then these things show up on the surface, but a lot of archaeology is buried underground. So we also have remote sensing technologies. Remote sensing helps us peek under the ground. It helps us to cover a lot of areas. You know, if you can imagine walking along and having to walk over every single surface to find stuff, it would take a long time and be very labor intensive, and you still might miss stuff. But we can use LiDAR, we use drones, we can use ground penetrating radar, resistivity, magnetometry. These are all ways to help us find sites. So I'm going to zip through some quickly here. LiDAR stands for lag detection and ranging. It's done from an airplane. The airplane flies over. It's actually a way of taking photographs. They're firing laser beams down, little invisible beams of light. Bing, 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 bing. And they hit things, and they bounce back up to a collector in the airplane. So they're bouncing back off of this surface, and off this surface, and off that surface, and off your head, and off that chair, and everywhere. And this little collector is collecting them all in the airplane, and it's collecting all the data for where it is, how high it is, where it's left, right, everything, collecting all of that information. And now we can sit down and use computer algorithms and take away the ones that bounced off people and houses and roads until we get down to just the ground surface. So look what we end up with. This is an aerial photograph of an archaeological site in northeast Iowa called Snai-McGill. 13CT18. Can you see the site? You see the trees. That's the Mississippi River run along the side of it there. There's the LiDAR image of the same site. Take away those trees, and there's dozens and dozens of burial mounds there. Some of them you can see are bird-shaped. There's a little animal down here. You can also see, come on, move. Some of them, let's zoom in on this one here. See, this one has a divot in the top of it. That means somebody's looted that mound. Somebody dug into it. That's illegal. You can also see down here, the river is starting to erode the banks. It's slumping off, and there's a little bear there, and there's a linear mound there that are getting damaged by the river. So by looking at the LiDAR, we can go, emergency, emergency. This is a really important cemetery site from past, and it needs to be protected and preserved. So we can now send somebody out there to, with riprap, big piles of rock, to barricade that riverbank and keep the river from damaging the site. So it's also important that we want to protect sites as well. In fact, more often we want to protect them than we want to dig them up. This site, these are the effigy mound sites. It's the late pre-contact period, probably 1,000 to 1,600 time period. We also have drones. Drones are really useful for fast data collection. You can fly that little airplane over all kinds of surfaces a lot faster than you can walk on it. You can use it for flying along riverbanks. You can check architectural resources, fly over the top of buildings and things like that. And you can attach a thermal imaging camera to it and study the different ways that the heat is absorbed by the ground. So here's some imaging stuff we have up here in the corner. This is an aerial view of one of the archaeological excavations being done over on the Little Sioux River. There's the drone flying over. But you can see the river is cutting right up against that site as well. And every day, every week when we got back to the site, every Monday morning, we would go down there and we would try and walk along that edge to see, because the river was constantly eroding out more features. Well, some of those edges you can't walk along unless you can walk on water. So if we can fly a drone along there and take pictures of it, we will spot things like this. Come on. Do you see the feature? Oh, do I have to turn it off to make you do that? That's a pit. That's a storage pit. It's about 900 to 1,000 years old. People stored their food in the ground. They had to dig a pit. If you dig a hole in the ground, even if you fill it back in, an archaeologist can find it. If you drive a post in the ground, that post will rot away, but it'll leave a dark stain because of increased organic matter in there, and we can find it again. So this is an exposed storage pit, and the rubble down underneath there is some of the stuff that was in that pit. So flying that drone along the edge on a weekly basis when we were out there working helped us to identify some of these features as the site was getting eroded by the river. Ground penetrating radar. This is something that an antenna sends electromagnetic waves into the ground, and it's really good for identifying foundations and things like that. On the right, on the left, you will see this is a map that was drawn in 1842 of the Fort Atkinson site up in Winneshiek County, and so we have the map that the soldier who was living there at the time drew. But now that site's gone. Part of the site is in public property, as in private property. There's a farm there. And we wanted to know what's left. Actually, there are actually some buildings still standing there. And we're like, what else is still there? So we did some ground penetrating radar. And on the right here, you can see all of the red dots. Those are what showed up from the ground penetrating radar. And if you look at the first map over here, these two long skinny buildings here labeled 2005, those are the stables. This was a cavalry. And if you go over here, oh, look what shows up over here. This is a farmer's field. This is the house, the barn. So over here, though, we can still detect the presence of the cavalry's stables. Other things showed up, like the parade ground. Even the flagpole right there in the middle shows up. So using ground penetrating radar, we were able to identify many more of the features and the structures at this site. If you go to that site today, many of them have been exposed. You can visit it. We've got a map where you can walk around, and you're still just seeing foundations, but you're like, oh, this was the officers' quarters. This is where they stored the ammunition, things like that. So you can go on there and walk around, take a walking tour. Remote sensing allows us to find buried features. This is a really cool site. Sometimes remote sensing, you've got to have, make your eyeballs go blurry. But this is a gradiometry survey. Can you see this thing that looks like a dog bone? That's a village. That's a fortified village. Get out my pointer again. These are the walls. These are bastions, like on a castle, where people can stand here and defend it. So if people are attacking from the north, from the east, from the south, they can defend it 3/4 of the way around. Here's another bastion. Here's another one down here. Here's a plowed field where it's taken away. And this is the entrance. This is called a baffle entrance. They didn't have a drawbridge or a gate, but they had like a maze, walls. So anybody coming in had to walk down and around and between the walls to get in. So here's one wall. Here's another wall. So you could have people standing on those walls watching who's coming in. And if it's not somebody you want coming in, you can defend yourself and keep them from coming in. All that showed up. We didn't have to put a shovel in the ground. And this is cool because this site just needs protecting. We don't need to go excavate it, but we know what's there. We learned a lot of information there. We spent like 4 days there, where finding that whole thing would have taken weeks and weeks and weeks and thousands of dollars. Resistivity, this is where we use probes to detect electrical resistance in the soil. It's good for finding buried structures, walls. It can often detect disturbances like ditches and pits and houses. We can also use magnetometry, which measures variations in the Earth's crust or in the Earth's magnetic field. And that's good for detecting features too. Now this is what I mean about sometimes the results from these things are pretty blurry. If you let your eyes go a little blurry out of focus, can you see the circles? Every one of those black dots is a piece of metal that showed up in this site. This site's been under cultivation for like 200 years. There's nails and bits of wire and stuff all over in there, but can you see the circle? Concentrate hard. There's one. And there's another one. So the analysts looking at this go, oh, there's something there. Again, this is one of these things where we had like 4 days to work on this site. We only had one research question. Is there anything still there? This was the last village that the Bahoji, the Iowa Nation, lived in Iowa before they were moved out of the state. We know they were here, but we don't know, was anything left of this site? It's been under cultivation for hundreds of years. So we had these two little sites, and we decided to put in a test unit on one of the edges, and look what we found. You see the mound in there? The dark stain. It's full of bones. It's got this white lens here, which turned out to be this ash. So this is a dump. Somebody clearing out the fireplace, dumping the garbage over here, probably against a wall. That's probably what that circle is. So they were just cleaning things out, and deep down inside that pile of ash, we found this little pipe. So the answer was there. Yes, there is still buried stuff from this site that's still surviving, that's still intact. So now we got to go test. That was called a test. That was just a little excavation. So if we're going to do a major excavation, we're going to carefully lay out a grid. This is 1 meter squares. A meter is about 3 feet. And this helps us keep track of the location of every artifact. Grids are used to make maps. We want to know where everything came from. The sad thing about archaeology, when you come right down to it, when we're done, there's nothing left. We destroy a site as we excavate it. If we don't keep good track of all the data, if we don't keep our photographs and our notes and our maps, if we don't share what we learned, we're no better than anybody who loots a site, any vandals. We have to keep those records. Those records have to be available for somebody to come down 20 years from now and say, I want to see the stuff from the Cherokee site that was done in 1975, and we can show them. We can go the artifacts, we can show them the data, we can show them the records, all of the photographs. They can do a new analysis. There's a whole lot of new scientific things that you can do with stuff that you couldn't do in 1975 when that site was excavated. So now, there's all kinds of research that people can do. This is a 1 meter square. This is that site in Cherokee. It was a bison kill site. There were lots and lots of bones in there. This is good stuff for me. But this is a 1 meter square. She has to map in all these artifacts. So she's laid down a grid. Each one of those is a little 10 centimeter square. And she can stand there with her graph paper and draw them all in. Every single square that was excavated, they did that on. And all that information is still intact. We also want to keep track not only this way, horizontally, but vertically. This same site went back thousands and thousands of years. This layer up here, dark layer there, Horizon 1, 6,000 years old. These folks are working on Horizon 2. It was 7,000 years old. Down here, still more stuff, still more occupation, 8,000 years old. There's some deeply, deeply buried strata at this site, and they were coming back to the same place over and over and over again doing bison hunting. One of my favorite artifacts from Iowa comes from this site. Up here in the 7,000-year-old horizon was a flute made on the wing bone of a swan. And in the midst of all this, I mean, they were getting food here. They were doing a lot of hunting of bison and butchering of bison. But they were also making music and art. And it always, we have to remember, these are people just like us. They like art. They like music. It wasn't a struggle for survival like some people want to think. They had aesthetic pleasures as well. As we dig, we screen. We run everything through quarter-inch mesh screens to recover even the littlest things. And then if we've hit one of those features, one of those storage pits, we'll take it through water screens to recover even smaller stuff. So this is a little video here. This is the water screening machine in our office. And we've dumped the dirt in there. There's water squirting up from the bottom. And what she's doing, she's breaking up the dirt in the lumps. And as you see, it flows over the edge. And there's material getting caught on the hardware cloth on the other side. We'll zoom over in there in a second. There we go. Yay. That's called the light fraction. That's the stuff that floated. And that's full of goodies. That's full of charred seeds. Little bitty, think like poppy seeds, little tiny things, fish scales. We can also recover. So we have the light fraction and we have the heavy fraction. You can look at this closely. You can see beads, charred bones, nutshells, all kinds of goodies recovered in these little things. So that's important information that we get from the tiniest bits. So a lot of people, it's like archaeology is all about digging, but it's not. The digging is how we collect the information. Now we go back to the lab. Estimated, for every week you spend in the field, you're going to spend a month in the laboratory. And that's just doing the analysis. And then you're going to write it up. Because if we don't share the information, what good is it? I could go home and dig a site and say, oh, I found some really cool stuff. But if I don't tell anybody about it, so what? We need to have all those pieces of the puzzle. So back in the lab, we could do flora analysis. This is ethnobotany. Flora is analysis of plant remains. Faunal analysis, which is zooarchaeology, or the animal remains. That's me. Biological anthropology, that is examining human remains. We have the soils and geomorphology people who are studying the landforms and how that soil was built up, how the site developed. And then we go to other sources of information. We're going to look at ethnology and ethnography. These are information from living Native Americans or other descendant communities. Because I work in the pre-contact period, I'm interested in Native American descendant communities. People might, if we excavated the Danish Hall in Davenport, we can talk to the descendants of the people who live there. And then the other thing we do then is experimentation, also known as fun and games. What are we going to learn about from plants? What did people use plants for? Food, medicine, fuel, building materials, fiber for weaving and cordage. These are all things that we can, that's why we want to find out what plants were there. What are we going to learn from the animals? Same kind of information. If I find a mammoth, what was the environment like? Cold, yeah, it was Ice Age. That immediately gives me time and environment. If I find bison, what's the environment like? Plains, grasslands. If I'm finding deer and things like that, I'm in the woodlands. If I'm finding lots of fish, we must have water nearby. We can also look at the kinds of things people used animal bones for. Bones are cool because you can carve them like wood, but they last a whole lot longer than wood. People use them for everything from hose, there's my flute down there, beads, jewelry, awls for poking holes in things so you can sew, fish hooks, jewelry, carved bone bracelets and things like that. I love that stuff. So when we go to the anthropological record, the ethnography, we can find things like, this is a woman named Buffalo Bird Woman. She's Hidatsa. She lived in the late 1890s, in the early 1900s. She worked with an anthropologist named Gilbert Wilson. He could interview her. Like I said, we don't usually get this. But she knew how to make, here she's using a bone hoe. That we find those scapula hoes everywhere. And she said, here's how you use them. She said when she grew up, she had metal hoes, iron, but she remembered her grandmother's using bone hoes. So she was able to make one and demonstrate how they were used. She knew how to build an earth lodge. She had all kinds of cool information, and Gilbert Wilson wrote it all down. And now I can go back to that. If I'm studying an earth lodge village in Iowa and I'm finding those scapula, I'm like, I know what they were doing. They were farming. They were using these hoes. So I can use that information from the past. This is Jonathan Buffalo. He's the Meskwaki tribal historian. The Meskwaki living in Tama, Iowa. They're still here. I can go then and I can talk to them. They still know the stories about things that their ancestors did. And in fact, this woman over here, the Meskwaki covered their houses, their wickiups, with woven cattail mats. They covered the walls. Remember that Wampanoag house with those woven mats hanging on the inside? They were there. The Meskwaki did the same thing. And she's giving a demonstration here about how to weave those cattail mats. So this is a tradition that they still have. They live in houses just like all the rest of us do, but they're maintaining some of their ancient traditions because it's their connection with their past. And if I go back up here to Jonathan, these are the cattails that they use to do it. They don't grow in Iowa anymore. Look, Jonathan's a big fella. These things are like 10 feet tall. But because we have drained most of the wetlands in Iowa, this tall growing cattails don't grow here anymore. So they had to go to Oklahoma to their friends, the Kickapoo in Oklahoma, and harvest those big tall cattails. They're bringing some back and they're reestablishing them on the Meskwaki settlement so that they can grow some more. So that's ethnographic information. And finally, experimentation. I had a teacher when I was in graduate school, and we'd say, Dr. White, this is what we think is going on. And she would say, you do it. Uh-oh. This woman is an experimental archaeologist. She learned to make her own stone tools, and then she puts them to work. Here she's processing a hide with a scraper. And then she's going to investigate. She's going to look under her electron microscope and look at the use-wear that developed from scraping a hide. See, they're rounded and smoothed and polished and shiny. And she's going to do the same thing cutting grasses. All kinds of other possible uses for those stone tools. And now she can go back and compare what she learned from her experiments and look at the tools from ancient sites and begin to say, this use-wear matches that use-wear that they were doing to process hides. This use-wear looks more like they were cutting grass with theirs. So all kinds of experimentation. We try making cordage by hand, things like that. So we're back to the origins here, archaeology, human cultures. It's all about anthropology. So I'm going to stop talking and let you guys ask me any questions that you might have, or if you have ideas for your activities and things like that that you're working on with your programs, we can talk about those too. Questions? Thoughts? Green light.
So our FTC season, our league name this year is Stonehenge, and I was researching Stonehenge as someone does, and
It's cool. Cool place.
and so I came upon an article about early builders and their canine companions.
Mm-hmm.
So, being that animals is your focus of study, what is the earliest sign of domesticated dogs in
The New World?
the New World?
Yeah, I don't know about Europe so much. They probably brought dogs with them when they came across the Bering Land Bridge. Yeah, the earliest, very old sites up there in Alaska have domesticated dogs with them. So people were interacting with wolves probably very early on and domesticating them. There's an argument that the dogs domesticated the people too. Right? They get a warm place to sleep, they get free food, you know. Pretty cushy job for a dog.
Thank you.
There's one.
What is the most interesting thing you've learned of in Iowa that was found? You
Well,
mentioned
I
that
like that
flute.
flute.
Is that
People are always asking me that question, but I like the puzzle piece thing. I like discovering something that just adds a new piece to our knowledge about what was going on in Iowa. That site, with the dog bone thing, the fortification ditch, that site was devastated by a flood. The dike broke, so instead of, usually floods just kind of go up and go down and leave a lot of mud behind. But this one, because the dike broke, it swept across with a current and washed away a lot of dirt and exposed all kinds of features and all kinds of animal bones, which I thought was great. But it told us the story of how they were butchering bison at that site. They had whole articulated spines from the back of the skull to the base of the tail. That's the stuff you throw away at the butchering site, at the kill site. Nobody wants to drag 2,000 pounds of bison home with them. So you butcher it and you bring back the good stuff and you leave the junk behind. But they were apparently killing animals right there at the site. And they're waking up in the morning going, hey, there's one over there, go get it, hon. So I thought that was pretty cool because that was some knowledge we never had before. In fact, the time that this site was occupied, people were suggesting that the dryness and the size of the villages, that people were having to go farther and farther afield to find bison. Not at this site, they were right there next door. The other cool thing was there were no skulls. There were hundreds of bison there and no skulls. I had two teeth from the upper part of the skull. What happened to the skulls? What were they doing with them? I don't know. But I'm really curious to know. We do know that people of Earth Lodge cultures like that, if we look at the Mandan and the Hidatsa, the people that Lewis and Clark spent their first winter with, when you see those villages, you see shrines made out of bison skulls. You see bison skulls on top of some of the houses. So I'm guessing that there was some important thing that those bison were being used for. They were part of a religious ceremony or something like that, but we didn't find them. So for every answer you get a whole bunch more questions. But I found it quite fascinating.
So
So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this field? Maybe what you were thinking about in high school? How'd you go through college, grad school?
Well, when I started college, it was somewhere between paleontology and archaeology. I liked being outdoors. I like exploring things. I can't see myself, sitting, running a business. Nobody would want me keeping their books. Not my forte. But so when I got to college, I started taking a lot of geology classes, and I started taking a lot of anthropology classes. And it turned out I just really loved anthropology. We spent a lot of time reading ethnographies, where somebody went and lived with pygmies in Africa for a while, or somebody went and studied the Aborigines in Australia. And I found those things really fascinated, and I got to, I like the idea of trying to figure out from artifacts, can we piece together things like those ethnographers were finding out. I couldn't picture myself going off and living in a little village by myself, interviewing people, but I could picture myself digging up artifacts and trying to piece the puzzles together. So that's how.
How about a little earlier, right? We've got grade school, middle school, high school kids here. So what was the click, right? You went off to college already with an idea.
Mm-hmm.
How about earlier? Who influenced you, or what?
I grew up in Western New York, and I lived across the street from the curator of the Buffalo Museum of Science. They used to go on family vacations and pull into the driveway with like mammoth tusks hanging out of the back of the of the station wagon. I'm like, okay, that looks fun. And of course, Fred Hall would, take us to the museum. He, we hung out with his kids, and their families were friends, so we got to kind of see some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that went on at the museum, and it just looked like a whole lot of fun to me. I was always a museum nerd anyway.
I don't know how to explain it, but you talk to other people, right?
Right.
Do you have meetings? Can you explain to them how you talk to people?
Exactly. Yeah, that's really important because nobody can do it all. Might spend one whole year working on one site that we excavated and wrote the report for. So I want other people to read my report. But it takes a long time for that stuff to get into print and to get circulated. So when I go every year to different conferences. We have the Plains Anthropological Society, where all the archaeologists working on the plains get together every year, and we give papers to each other and share information. There's also the Midwest Archaeological Conference, which is sort of a different group of people, but we overlap. This year in Iowa City, the MAC and the Plains had a joint conference. So we had lots of more archaeologists there. So we go and we share that information. I sit there and other people's papers and take notes. But the most fun is just standing around talking to people and hearing out how they solve different problems or what they found, or somebody comes up to you and goes, oh, you've got dogs at that site, and I'm doing research to find out, I want to find out evidence from all of the dogs that have been found on Great Plains sites. And she wanted to do chemical analysis of their teeth, or you could figure out what the dogs were eating. So we were able to send her samples from Iowa, and she was collecting them from North Dakota and South Dakota. So that was her graduate research project. But because she knew I announced we found dogs at the Dixon site, she said, oh, can I see your dog bones? So it's all that communication. We also publish information in journals. So the Plains Anthropological Society has a journal that comes out every year. Couple of times a year, where we have write-ups of these things. We share information that way. It's really important. And then every now and then, somebody can sit back and say, I'm going to write out everything we know about the Archaic period on the Great Plains. There's a book that Lynn Alex wrote in 2000, Iowa's Archaeological Past, where she synthesized all the information we had at that time of the archaeology of Iowa. So then you get these bigger books that are synthesizing information, and now everybody's going, well, it's been 25 years since Lynn's book came out. Maybe it's time to add more and redo it again. So yes, it's really important to share information. And it's really exciting because some of you come up with an idea and somebody goes, I found that too. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness. That means I was on the right track. All good information.
What kind of religious aspects or like evidence have you found in Iowa?
Religious stuff. Well, you want pre-contact? That's my bag. Well, all those mounds. those are people's cemeteries. They built those mounds to honor their dead. It was a lot of work. If you had a bone tool to dig with, and you had to carry basket full of dirt to get to those sites. So that's an important thing. We don't always know what the symbolism is about. If you go, I don't know, have any of you ever been to Effigy Mounds National Monument? Yeah, all of those effigy mounds. The effigies don't contain burials. The conical mounds and the linear mounds contain burials. So why did they go to all the work of building those bears and those birds? Those are symbolic of something. It's been suggested they might identify clans. There's a bear clan. The Iowa have a bear clan. The Iowa have an eagle clan. The Ho-Chunk have similar kinds of clans. So that might have been something like that. But Lance Foster, who was a Bakhoji in Iowa, he was also an archaeologist. He was also a member of the Iowa Nation. He said, everybody kept talking about mounds are sacred sites. He goes, no. The mounds are there because the landscape was sacred. So if you've been up there and you've stood on Fire Point, where you have this huge panoramic view of the Mississippi River Valley, where the Wisconsin River is coming in there, and it's just a gorgeous and dynamic place. It's a kind of place where you go, the same feeling you have when you climb up a mountain just to look around, or you stand there and you watch the waves come crashing in. It's called the nuministic. It's something about that landscape that affects your brain. And Lance says those nuministic landscapes were the reason people chose to bury their dead there. And frankly, it'd be a good place to be found. So those are all that. That rock art that we find, there's reasons, spiritual reasons, traditional reasons for that rock art as well. They were part of ceremonies. We can't reach into people's brains and find out what those ceremonies were, but we know that they were there and that they were important. Anytime that you're spending time drawing on a rock, pecking a design in, you're going to a lot of work for a very important reason. We don't know exactly what the symbols were. But then we can step up a little bit and we can look at ledger art, which Native Americans drew back in the historic period, the post-contact period, and those we can identify. A lot of some of the symbols that they use in ledger art are also symbols that show up in the rock art. So we could start to kind of make connections that way. So it's really hard to get inside people's heads. But we know that we find things that it's more than just finding food, building a house, building a fire and staying warm. There was all kinds of spiritual and aesthetic things going on as well. Yeah, another question.
Was there anything more like meaningful to the mounds besides cemeteries and where villages were built and stuff?
What do you mean more meaningful?
Was there more to it?
Oh, undoubtedly. Usually around the mounds, near the mounds, you usually find villages of the people who were burying their dead up on the heights or the special places that they're selected to bury their dead. So yeah, it's a whole thing going on in that region at that time period. So as I say, we can't know what they were thinking, but we can see the patterns of how things were developing. I see another question in the back there.
Could you talk about looting and who loots and who looted stuff, and like how common is it?
It's very
What is
common.
it?
How many people do you know have arrowhead collections? Those are all looted from sites. Every one of those that's taken out of a site is a little piece of that puzzle that's gone. Some of that is not terribly serious. You know, somebody picking up an arrowhead or something like that. Somebody digging into a mound, however. And you looked at that Sny McGill site, many of the mounds in there had depressions in them. People like to collect artifacts. And that damages the sites. If you're damaging a burial site, you're digging up somebody's cemetery. You're defacing something that was of religious importance to those people. And in 1979, the state of Iowa recognized the fact that this was wrong. And it's now against the law in Iowa to damage any kind of human interment, no matter how old it is, no matter whether it's on public land or private land. The rest of the United States got on board with that in the 1990s, but Iowa was way ahead of this thing on that. Sometimes damage to sites is accidental. People are plowing a field back and forth and don't even realize that they're, that's a site that they're plowing up. So you can't stop all of that. And, it's their land. They're doing the plowing. It's nice when people contact us. If you're finding artifacts on your property, we don't want those artifacts. We're not going to take it away. We're not going to take away your land. But we would like that information. We'd like to put another one of those dots on our map and find out what kind of information we have. If I could look at your spears, I could probably tell about how old that site was. And I could probably figure out what was going on there, and I can add that dot to the map, and that gives us more of the picture. So people walking across a plowed field and picking up artifacts, that is removing some of the information. It's not doing a whole lot of damage, but once people start digging things up, that's mixing things. When people start buying and selling artifacts, they have a collection, and they show us a collection, and I'm like, oh, what site were these from? I don't know, I bought them from some guy in Illinois. That doesn't help. That doesn't give us good information. But if people say, this is my collection, and it came from that field over there, right along the creek, we're like, oh, okay, that's good information for us. I like to look at your collection. I'll take some pictures. I'll make a dot on the map. So that's the kind of thing that happens. And there's also stuff, you look at historic sites. People want to dive down to the Titanic and come back with something. I have a piece of the Titanic, and it makes them feel good, but it's removed something from an archaeological site and also a burial site. So yeah, it happens, and it happens a lot. There's a question right over here.
How would they compose music?
Don't know. Using their heads and their creativity, we know they did it. If you've listened to Native American music today, it's a different kind of a musical scale, things like that. But that's something that doesn't get preserved in the archaeological record, so there are not some things that we'll never know. Same kind of imagination that modern people have too. Got a couple of people back here that have some questions. Okay, can we just get there's a couple of people. They've been patiently waiting.
Do you know how many sites are in Iowa now?
More than 35,000. New more every day.
So, what kind of animals do they hunt in Iowa? Ones that just around, or do they go for ones that would be useful?
They are hunting everything: bison, elk, lots and lots of deer, also little animals like rabbits and squirrels and things like that. They also went fishing. Fish and turtles were big. Birds, different kind of birds, turkeys, ducks, geese, swans, things like that. A lot of it was right around their village, but sometimes they would take a big trip and go out on the plains and spend a couple weeks hunting bison and then bring all that meat home again. So both local and spread out. There was one more person over here that had a question too.
What's the purpose of looting and why would people do it?
Well, people think it's cool. I can understand that. I mean, that's how archaeology got started. People from Europe were going down to Egypt and finding mummies and things like that. And they thought, wow, cool. And they would bring them home and they would put them in what they called their cabinet of curiosities. And it's like, if you were a rich dude, you had your own mummy. And then eventually people started saying, I wonder what this mummy business is all about. Why were people doing it? What are all these drawings on the walls of the pyramids mean? And that's when the anthropology started kicking in. And scientists started saying, let's look a little more closely. Let's not just go for the cool mummy. And instead, let's find out what it means. Who was this mummy? Why did they do this? All those good anthropology questions. So people do it because they're fascinated. Yep, go ahead.
So in modern day era, what type of security measures do they have for these sites?
None. Well, some big sites, might be fenced. I mean, there are some really major sites, like the Effigy Mounds National Monument. That's state land, national land. It's protected and preserved, but there is no wall around it. People can go up there and hike around and look. We just have to trust that they're not going to root around in those mounds. Big sites like Cahokia are manned by people all the time. But those 35,000 sites all around the state of Iowa are on private land, they're on public land. There's very little. Sometimes they're what we call archaeological preserves. And if you do Google search, Iowa Archaeological Preserves, you'll get a map of where they are. And those are fenced and protected, but you can still go visit them. But yeah, protecting them is kind of a major thing. And to me, what we need to do more is educate people. That's why I like to talk to people. Now you know that picking up those arrowheads or digging into that site is damaging the information, and that the better thing to do is to report what you found to the state archaeologist's office, and we can tell you about it, and we can add that information, and then you have contributed to the science. Thank you all for listening so well.